Hey everyone, welcome to the 8th episode of Edgar Church's Basement, a collectible comics podcast from me, Rob Larson. I run a YouTube channel and blog, both called It's All Just Comics. You can find them at youtube.com/itsallJustComics and itsallJustComics.com. There, I share research, auction reviews, previews on a weekly basis, and actually more than weekly on the YouTube channel because I like making videos. This podcast is a companion to that work where I can talk about comics in a more free-form manner, discuss whatever topics are on my mind, and kind of do some research. I do a lot of research, but doing research in real time, which has been fun. I've discovered things like in the recording of the podcast that have turned into videos on the channel and actually just like really fascinating topics of discussion for me. So I'm going to continue to do that, and it will be fun. This week, I want to talk about one of the most interesting and honestly cool changes of the past 25 years.
Now, we all know the classic cover designation in Overstreet.
But over the past 25 years, many books with that kind of key designation of, classic cover have increased exponentially in value. There are examples, where you could buy a book for, $400 in 2002, and now it's worth $100,000 or something like that. And there are examples that have increased, 2 times, 5 times, 10 times as well. Not everyone is quite that good, but, there have been a lot of books that have increased in value. So, last 25 years, that's the CGC era plus the growth of the web and the internet as the primary venue for buying and selling comics. And so the value of classic covers has increased exponentially during that period. And there are reasons for that. I'm not sure of all of them, but I want to kind of talk about the reasons for it here. So before I get into that, what am I talking about specifically? Well, books like Superman 14 and Detective Comics number 31 are in fact classic covers, the most classic, actually, those two. And they're extremely valuable. Those aren't really the books I'm talking about here. In this context, I'm talking about books with the classic cover key designation in Overstreet that are from lesser known or secondary titles. And in fact, some obscure titles. There are some titles that didn't sell, no one cared about until somebody discovered that they had cool covers, which I'll talk about in a second. And also, the point is that they have increased in value since 2000. So I'm going to be focusing on not the discussion here on those books because I'm not going to go through an exhaustive list of those books on a podcast without being able to show you the covers. But those are the books I'm talking about. And I'm going to follow up with a video about the stars of the CGC era in terms of classic covers and, incredible increases in value. And it'll be fun. It'll be full of incredible returns because I don't always have incredible returns on the YouTube channel. I talk about books that take a bath all the time. I'll talk about incredible returns for comics, unbelievable returns on some of these things. And I'll be showing classic covers. So I'm probably going to do 20. It'll be insane. But first I want to kind of wrap my own head around it. What's gone on, and doing it in this format, the podcast format, is kind of perfect. This one won't be that long. I've done kind of half an hour discussions where I'm talking about dozens of books. But this is, it doesn't always have to be a long subject. Sometimes it can be quicker. So, what am I going to talk about? My perception of the change. I'm going to talk about how it relates to CGC grading in general. And all of this ties into the perceived values of covers versus the book inside. Because, some of the changes that we've seen over the past 25 years are obvious, but others aren't as obvious, and it's worth kind of discussing them. So in this context, the first book that caught my attention was Suspense 3. It's the perfect storm. It's tough to find. It's from an obscure title. The cover is insanely good, and it's by one of the most collectible cover artists of the golden age, Alex Schomburg. So it's a perfect storm. And that book, of course, has sold for $1 bazillion. And while it's true that the rise of Suspense 3 and several other cover keys started with the release of the Photojournal Guide to Comics in 1990, the acceleration of the importance and value of this book really took off in the CGC era. I didn't even know about this book in the 1990s. I was around. I wasn't in the right place to get excited about Suspense 3 until the 2000s. But once I saw it, I was like, wow, this is crazy. And I started covering the book regularly around 2005, and I haven't stopped covering it since because whenever it sells, it's an event. And the thing is, the easy availability of pictures and scans of the book on the internet really raised its profile. You go to Google, you type in Suspense Comics 3, and you can find probably, I mean, now you definitely can, but even back then, even the early 2000s, you could find a high res scan from some place like Heritage, and you could just ogle the book to your heart's content, right? You didn't need to buy the photojournal guides. And even the photojournal guides aren't high res scans, right? It's incredible. This rise in popularity, rise in profile, and rise in value culminated in 2017 when we discovered that there was a church copy, and the hype for this book went into overdrive. There are other books that have gone crazy, many by Schomburg himself. Startling Comics number 49 is another prime example, and I'll cover those in a separate video on my channel. But for me, the poster child is definitely Suspense Comics number 3. It's been the longest standard bearer for this kind of cover key category and has continued to grow in stature and value over the years, selling for as much as $280,000 in CGC 6.5. We're not far away from a world where the church copy is $1 million book. I have no idea what is even inside that book, by the way. I have no idea. No clue. I've never owned one. I mean, how many people have? There's not many. And yeah, I've never looked inside one. So if anybody has owned one and can tell me what the interiors look like, what the stories are, let me know because I'm fascinated. There are a couple of reasons I thought about this topic this week. The Famous Funnies 214 CGC 9.4 sale at Comic Link was one. It sold for $95,000. And then one of my own comments about a book in the Olympia collection, which had 2 detached wraps, like put this into context for me in a kind of different context. The $95,000 result for the Frazetta cover is obvious. Why the Olympia collection book? It's because I called it a bargain. Since it's got internal damage, I automatically discounted the damage. It's CGC graded after all. You're never going to touch the book and see that there are detached pages and worry about them falling out and worrying about them, some paper loss because they're improperly stored or whatever. It's in its plastic tomb. It's not going anywhere. Detached wraps don't matter. And it looks nice as you appreciate the book inside the holder. And I know that that's kind of weird. I know that there are people that hate CGC for exactly that reason. And for me, it's not a bug. It's a feature, right? Like, I'm fine with that. I've talked for many years about having seen the Superman #1, now it's CGC 8.5, Edgar Church copy. And it was already in a tomb. So, like, Bashar didn't have it out. There was no way, even in his hands, I was going to be able to see the inside. So, I've never been able to see the interior damage. There's interior damage, apparently, to some pages. That damage was repaired, with professionally repaired. So, Japan paper, reversible techniques. And in the CGC era, the missing paper inside the book was removed. And it's still got NATO. It's a gorgeous book, incredible book, set a record for the most valuable comic book of all time, etc. But it just like there's this interior damage that no one even talks about. No one cares. Like no one cares. And that's fine. It's just the hobby has evolved in certain ways, right? But we're discounting either in terms of value or perception of value, interior damage because the books are slammed. And that's interesting. I mean, it's certainly an area for nuanced debate, right? So there are some examples like the detached wraps where like I didn't care. There are other things where, brittle pages, tan pages, even cream pages on certain books, like that turns me off. Like I don't want that, even though I'm never going to handle the book. I'm never going to pull out that book with slightly tan pages and flip through it and fear that the pages are going to chip off in my hands. Brittle pages, especially. I mean, in a CGC holder, they're somewhat in stasis. I mean, I've seen examples of flaky paper loss inside the holder, but for the most part, it's like you're going to do as well as you can with the book in a CGC holder. So brittle pages shouldn't be a deal breaker, and maybe for some people they're not, but for me, like I'm still looking for white pages, off-white pages, even on mid-grade books, even on lower grade books, right? Like I want that preservation because I know that the books are going to last longer, even in the perfect storage conditions. They're going to last longer than a book that started off with more acidity and damage to the paper. So but then I look at something with a interior damage and it looks nice and it's off-white pages or cream to off-white, which is fine. My limit actually cream to off-white, and I go, yeah, it's a bargain, right? I don't know. It's funny. And everyone's got their own, standards, right? I'm not saying that this is universal that people discount internal damage, but I can tell you that it doesn't. I mean, I've talked about the Superman #1 church copy a lot, and invariably, I'm the person to bring up the damage because it was for a long time it was a mystery like what the internal damage was. It was just talked about like in kind of hushed tones, and then I found out like I got details on the book because I looked at the graders notes, and you can there's missing piece out, and then I talked to some people who knew about it, and it was like, oh yeah, it had been restored, but restored professionally, thankfully, and they were able to remove the restoration. So yeah, so that's part of what I'm trying to figure out, right? Is like how I should feel about this. Like, what's the correct way to think about this? And there is none, right? But I mean, I'm trying to figure out like a stance I can take. So that's the negative or quasi negative or complicated part of this equation. The other part I think is generally positive, but it is a byproduct of CGC graded books and buying books over the internet. Basically, all you do is, so back in the day, you would go to a dealer at a convention, you would find a book you liked, you would say, hey, can I take a look at this? They would pull it out of the bag, they would hand it to you, they would stare at you to make sure you didn't get your grubby hands all over it and destroy the book. And but you would actually interact with the book in that way. You would look at the book, you would grade the book, looking for any obvious defects. If it was something really expensive, you might spend 15 or 20 minutes really looking it over. But you would also flip through the book, counting pages, looking for coupons clipped, missing Marvel value stamps, for example. And so the purchase of a collectible comic book or a comic book off the stands involved kind of taking in the whole thing. It involved the cover, but it also involved, the interiors. And a lot of like what drives value in comics is, of course, the interiors. It's not just the covers. And that's still what drives a lot of value in comics, right? Action Comics #1, Detective Comics #27, Hulk 181. All of these are key comics. New Mutants 98, key comic because of what happens inside. And we've seen with, incredible panel page results and incredible like key panel results from Heritage and other auction houses with original art that stuff matters, right? The first in costume appearance of Wolverine is pretty significant, right? It's very exciting. The cover would be exciting as well if it came up for auction, but you know what I mean. And so, that kind of breaks that connection. So you're not looking at a Suspense 3, opening it up, and as I'm assuming, there's like kind of trash art on the inside. There may not be. I don't know. I just feel like they wasted all their budget on getting Schomburg to draw their covers. Again, if you own one, let me know what's inside. There's probably scans of it out on the internet. I'm gonna go look for those. I'll do a short about what's inside Suspense 3. I really am because it's funny. But now you're buying comics, you're basically just looking at the grades. I mean, even me, right? So I'm not like perfect. If it's trust me, like when I was buying a Daredevil 1, I was poring over the scans at as high resolution as I possibly could and trying to identify what damage was there, whether the books could be improved, etc. I went to town. But, if I'm buying a $50 book or $100 book or, I don't know, $250 book or whatever, like I didn't go that crazy. If it was well centered, if it was 9.4, if it were, Silver Age book, well centered 9.4 white pages, I'm probably buying it without like poring over every last detail, which is, it's made possible by CGC, but it also like separates you from your interaction with the book. And all you're doing is looking at the cover. All you're doing is interacting with the cover. You're not picking the book up. You're not holding it. You're not flipping through it. And so that kind of breaks things, but it also weighs the value of the cover much more in the decision-making process, which allows something like Suspense 3 to get into the conversation of like, any given year, it could be the most valuable comic book sold, right? If the church copy came out again and no high grade copy of Detective 27 or mid grade copy of Detective 27 or, Action #1 came out, it sold for $1 million because two people were bonkers about it, then, I mean, that's possible. It's a scenario that could happen. I'm not saying it's likely, but I mean, it's a scenario that could happen. And that's because we look at the covers, and that's basically what you're buying right now. You're buying the number on the slab and you're buying the cover. So, and again, this is not actually the way that I think about it, but I think that on whole, there are people that think that way. I mean, I definitely think that there are people that think that way. That's what they're doing. And I think that the weighting of the cover versus the interiors has shifted. I don't think there's any question about that. Now, that's not quantifiable, right? But like, I think what we've seen with the rise of classic covers is down to that, is down to the value of the cover. And I do it, like I said. I mean, this is what I was talking about earlier. I discount internal damage just automatically without thinking about it because it's internal damage. It's not the cover. So that's ridiculous. I think another aspect that's really interesting about the rise of classic covers is the ability of the collectible hobby to kind of work on ideas and talk about things and think about things and create a body of knowledge and a collector base and sub fandoms, right? Like within comics fandom, like sub fandoms that are very strong and are full of people who are passionate and do a lot of research. I've been involved in many of them myself, right? So Daredevil collectors, obviously I was, in the club there on the CGC forum and we talked about stuff and you would trade information that maybe wouldn't have gotten traded before, would have been much more difficult about what books are actually tough and what books are, not so tough and, what books are undervalued and, you can actually start to change the way that the books are appreciated in those sort of places. And I know that, for example, romance comics or war comics have very passionate fan bases within the hobby, and especially romance comic. I mean, there's been a rise in the value of war comics for sure, because I think that there was just a realization that they're hard and they are important, etc. But, romance comics, I was shocked earlier this year seeing, some classic cover romance comics selling for $25,000, $30,000, books I'd never heard of. Now, it's not a collectible area that I follow. They're incredible covers, some of these books. And that was actually, I really excited. I was like, oh, I should research romance comics. And that's on my list, my in unending list. And so, yeah. And so, I mean, that's the thing is you start to identify stuff. You start to identify stuff that's key within your, subgenre, within your sub fandom. You start to identify stuff that's tough. And once you get that combination, you say, oh, this is the best Matt Baker cover. And it's also really tough. I've never seen a copy above 9. The CGC census stops at 8.5. I'm just making up an example. I will find some for the video I do on this topic later. And from there, things start to go up. Things start to get driven. And dealers can do it too, of course, right? So Fantastic Comics #3 is an example. But there are other examples of books that have been championed by dealers. And, eventually, not all the time, but eventually, they win out, right? Because I mean, sometimes they just have a good idea, and sometimes they just repeat the thing often enough until it becomes true. But a lot of times, Fantastic Comics #3 is like, forget it, incredible cover. Looking at how long I've been talking, I think I'm going to end it there. I think this is an interesting topic, and I really can't wait to put together a video showcasing some of the books that have done this journey over the last 25 years. It's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, mostly because the covers are going to be incredible, but it is also a little bit of something to talk about, and it's going to showcase so many positive results. There are people that have bought things for pennies that are not worth pennies anymore, let's say, which is fascinating. There are examples. For example, there are books that were too inexpensive to get CGC graded in the early 2000s that have sold for like $85,000 recently. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. So yeah, I'm going to end it there. I think if you have any comments on this, I really would like to hear them. If you're watching this on YouTube, listening to it, but watching this on YouTube, please drop some comments below. This is not like a fully baked idea in my head. As you can tell, I'm kind of running through it as I go. The good news is the video that's going to follow, that's going to just be pure fun, and I'll just share it and whatever. But like really understanding the way that this has worked, and some of so there's two aspects to it, right? One is the like impact of CGC on the way that we view comics, and then there's the rise of cover keys. And so if you have comments about either of those, please share them because, hey, it's fun. Yeah. So next week, another podcast episode. going to be continuing to do some kind of random stuff. It's been interesting to like spend a week figuring out what to talk about. If you haven't yet and you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe there. It helps the channel. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.